Should I do it? Hi,
Hi.
everyone. We're here for our transit series, and I'm here with Anthony of AP Astrology. I plug your Instagram a lot, and I always say it's very different than mine. It's very serene and aesthetically pleasing, and I feel like I'm chaos. So if you ever want the opposite of me, please go to my friend Anthony because he's wonderful.
Wait, I have to say though, like you totally have a vibe and an aesthetic going on though. For the longest time, you were like black and white. Like, I don't know, you had a whole thing going. Give yourself
I
some
did
credit.
very consistent with my content in 2021. And then I think I just kind of got burnt out and felt restricted as an Aquarius. And maybe I'll go back to it, but we'll see. But thank you. I appreciate you pointing it out.
I
So,
saw it.
so Anthony is a great astrologer, and we're going to talk about the opposition of Pluto and Mars by transit today. And Anthony went through this a few years ago, so he's made it out the other side. So he has some wisdom for us.
Hopefully.
And we're gonna put yes, and also talking a little there just a moment ago, and I hope we can kind of breeze back into what we were saying because we got into all these juicy conversations about the future and potentiality. I wanted to bring up this idea of like Pluto. Okay, so Pluto is a generational planet. I'm going through a Pluto transit right now, and my big takeaway has been that I'm not alone because I am experiencing something very generational. And so I've been thinking about things very strategically and less personally, which has been super helpful because it makes you think there's got to be a point to this, right?
Mhm.
And so Anthony and I were having a little conversation about that, and you were bringing up some interesting points about Pluto and having and people who will be going through this opposition when Pluto moves into Aquarius, which will be in a few months. If you're watching
Mhm.
this in the future, hello, we're there. We're in the future. You're part of it if you're our Mars and Leo and you're watching this video. So share with me your thoughts because they were really good.
Well, it's funny. You said one other thing too just now, and of course, like my brain is always like, ooh, shiny things. And I want to touch on this because you said I didn't feel alone because it's generational, and I think this ties into Pluto and Aquarius in the sense because is there resilience in community, right? And to me, thinking a lot about Pluto, it's a callback to power, especially Mars Pluto oppositions, right? Because there is that power dynamic, that struggle, that inner fire turmoil, whatever you want to call it, it's there, it exists. And I often view, and from my own personal experience, Mars Pluto is like possibly even the recognition of self-harm or the ways that you've been harmed by something outside of you. So we were talking about Pluto in Capricorn opposite Cancer placements, right? And coming out the other side of watching disenfranchised people from the system, right? And how power in the system has harmed so many other people. But when we look at Pluto and Aquarius, there's this power to the people. So we talked about resilience and community. And then Leo placements, specifically Mars and Leo, how do we combat the power struggles we may face in community, in society, in the world? And does it come from joy? Does it come from creativity? Like, from my personal perspective of Mars and Cancer opposite Pluto, softness, right? Vulnerability was such a strong sentiment for me through that transit. And it took a lot for me to be very raw with myself, even more than other people. And for full disclosure, it was on my rising and descendant is where I was experiencing this. So Mars, natal Mars conjunct my rising, and then Pluto opposing on the descendant. And there was a lot of being faced with abusive relationships that I've experienced, right? And it's funny, it was from 2013 to 2015 was the exaction. And I went into a self-imposed isolation, like for an entire year, as a way to like incubate myself, to pull myself out of situations that I was experiencing and have a lot of reflection and figure out like, who the hell am I? Like, what do I want? Right. And it was a callback even to my health too. Experienced eating disorders from the age 16 for many years. And the experience of Mars opposite Pluto was that inner resilience, that overcoming. So yeah, like I think for me, it was being soft and vulnerable with myself, giving myself grace in the process, right? I
Yeah.
don't know.
I love that, especially because I feel like we can meet Pluto with such disdain sometimes. And I don't want to like spiritually bypass anything, but I think that there has been a significantly divine part of experiencing a Pluto transit that has allowed me to feel my connectedness in isolation. As we're recording this, I guess we're still technically in a pandemic.
Mhm.
And many people are still very much isolating. Myself being chronically ill, I have not really kind of ventured out as comfortably as many people, but I'm getting there. I'm slowly getting there. But I feel like taking myself out of certain power struggles that I had been in
Mhm.
for a long time and that I allowed myself to stay silent in. Um, and just removing myself, it allowed me to really see things for what they are. And it's interesting, like it almost like I feel like sometimes we talk about Pluto, but like it can do Neptune things, like it can clear the air of disillusionment
Mhm.
and too. And I feel like Pluto's really kind of done that for me. It's put me in circumstances outside of what's comfortable for me. And
Mm.
through that light, I have been able to see the areas that I sat comfortably in that I didn't need to, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Well, think about like, so the transit you were experiencing was a conjunction, was it not? With
Yeah, conjunct my Mercury, my Lilith, and my Ceres. And
well,
I'm
okay.
so I'm meeting all
But
sorts of people still.
but okay, so Ceres, there's that comfort, like that nurturance in a sense, that kind of like Demeter type energy. But then Mercury, like maybe the rigidity and the comforts in the confines of our own mind, and like how do we expand beyond that? I mean, very similarly, like when we pull this back to Mars, both being personal planets, it's like how has that personally impacted your perspective? Mercury, my drive, my energy, Mars. It's
Mhm.
funny, like there's a level of control that is often that comes through with Pluto too.
Mhm.
And it's like who really has the control. And when it's a personal planet, there's a level of like, well, I have control, right?
Yeah,
And does that require self-discipline, right? Does that
yeah,
require self-determination? Or does it require forgiveness,
yeah,
right? Or yes,
yeah,
and could it be all of the above,
yeah. Great
right?
point.
But you talk about like the disillusionment and like the clearing the air. And I think a little bit about how through that Mars Pluto opposition, I felt like a lot was cleared out of my pathway. Like I said, I went self-imposed isolation, and this was way before the pandemic, right? This had to be what, almost 9 to 10 years, maybe no, maybe a little less than that, maybe like 7, 8 years before then. But it almost felt like I instinctively or maybe divinely, Pluto came in and cleared my pathway of people, of situations, and kind of said, this is a time to really hone in, right? What motivates you? What are you driven by? What are you passionate about? And so, thinking a little bit about Mars and Leo people going through this opposition, Mars and Leo has that tendency to be an entertainer in some ways, right? Or I often say that Leo energy is very good about expectation. It's something I appreciate about them and I really admire. Like there's this level of like, I do this thing and have a level of expectation that I receive it in return because I know my worth, right? And so what happens when in that opposition, Mars opposite Pluto, someone doesn't meet your expectations, right? And do you still feel valuable? Do you still feel passionate about the situation or the scenario? And how does your idea of expectation evolve? Where can you let go of control? Surrender, possibly. I don't know.
I feel with Mars too, it could be helpful. I feel like I would imagine, like I having not gone through this particular transit, feeling things somatically is going to be really
Mhm.
intense during this. So I would imagine too, being able to do things that are like physically changing your environment too could be pretty helpful, whether that's, physically changing your home and like redecorating or revamping or renewing it. It can be very literal in Cancer.
Well, I picked up and I moved like into a whole new part of the country.
Oh, wow.
I knew nobody. Yes.
So that's, again, a very literal interpretation. So if you're going through this and let's say you're finding this and you're in the 29th degree of Cancer and you're going to go through this in like in a few weeks, which is crazy. That could be a scenario. But it can also be helpful, I would imagine, for some people to really emphasize, Mars is associated with that like masculine part of us. So like maybe doing like martial arts or getting involved in something that's like kind of masculine and aggressive could be very helpful. I had a client that just started boxing during this transit, which I thought was pretty spot on. They never had really experienced a lot of anger until like, about 2 degrees away, it started coming up. And as they started becoming more and more themselves and more comfortable in their own skin, they started developing more resentment from other people. And it just developed this real anger problem. And they found it like super helpful during this transit to take up boxing. And I've seen like a genuine shift in them. Like they are physically like owning their masculine energy more. And they're walking with like more pep in their step. Like they used to kind of walk kind of sluggish. And it's like seeing someone become confident through this transit is really cool.
Well, I like that distinction. Like I'm a competitive runner and a cyclist, and cool. And a lot of that I started doing a lot of races around that time, that's like during the exaction period. And there's that regenerative energy that comes with Pluto and kind of Mars as well. It's funny, sometimes I view Pluto as like a higher octave of Mars, right? So to see them in opposition, there's definitely a relationship between the two. If you could even think about Scorpio and having that modern and traditional rulership between both. Anyway, I digress. The point being that the competitiveness is definitely there. The energy, the regeneration of energy can come through when we marry the opposition, right? Because there's always a polarity piece to that. And I always find in sister signs or polarity, there's like a through line or a connection that helps in some way. Thinking about martial arts, right, which is literally Martian, Mars. There's also fluidity in movement. So Cancer, Mars, right? There's one piece to this, but it's also a practice that feels very traditional, thinking about Pluto, Capricorn, right? That sense of structure that kind of goes back into whatever, like the history of martial arts. And then even thinking for Mars and Leo people with Pluto and Aquarius, right? Competitive, like sports and literal physical things, but even like creative outlets, right? Like for those who have Mars and Leo, where are you painting? How are you moving your body in a way that helps you work with Pluto, I guess, or even helps take what's going in the subconscious and bringing that forward, like in art, I often find, right? There's always an inspiration in that space. I'm also thinking a little bit about the Mars and activity piece. I don't know, this is really interesting to me because then I'm also thinking about food, right?
Yeah. I know many of my Mars and Leo friends love to feed me and cook deliciously. And you know what I've noticed? They're always so creative at coming up with things that are just like so warm and aesthetically pleasing and comforting without being super expensive or frilly. Like that's what my Mars and Leo friends are great at. Hearty soups, things like that I always associate with them.
Well, I'm even thinking like literal herbs or foods that have an association to Mars, right? Ginger being one of them, certain
Natal.
peppers. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's like, what would it take or how would that change your experience through eating these foods, right?
Yeah.
Or eating them intentionally.
I love
What'd
that.
you say?
I said, I love that. We're thinking of ways to work with the planets. We're adding them as elements of our life and embracing them. I mean, there's obviously, you know, creating an altar is nice, but how can we create like more of a living altar?
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yeah. And a lot of the things I've been personally reflecting on, kind of coming out of the whole transit in general, is bliss and surrender as kind of being this kind in creativity, these three energies kind of being a marriage of how I'm feeling moving out of this completely. So what would it take for someone who has Mars and Leo to start to embody that early on, right? Bliss kind of being that very Leo-like energy, which can exist. Surrender, dealing with Pluto, and then creativity coming from Mars and Leo as well. So like, where is that amalgamation? How does that show up in your life as a living altar as well? Like literally on my altar behind me, I have candles that I'm burning for both bliss and surrender. Right? But I'm also wondering too, like active healing, Mars opposite Pluto, right?
I'm thinking inner child, like right. How can we be joyful and indulge in pleasure in a way that isn't restricting, that gives freedom, that gives. So I'm thinking like, I mean, obviously this has like been like a hot button topic, like for anybody who's kind of alt or, you know, whatever subculture or subgenre you fall into. But like, I think things like polyamory and different relationships, I think that that's going to maybe become a little bit more normalized as people, you know, really figure out what they desire, what they want, what they crave. So many people have been, you know, traditioned by these, you know, these things that don't suit us. What do you call it? I'm very lucky that I did not grow up Catholic, but what do they call it? I'm so sorry, Anthony.
Okay. You talk about like the Catholic guilt kind of thing, like where they have like confession.
No, also just like really sick monogamy culture, like the things that they tell
yes.
like you owe a person this or that, like because they've done this or that for you, like just kind of those shitty expectations.
The indebtedness.
The indebtedness. And I'm sorry, guys. It's 6:30, which feels like 8:30 here now that it's getting dark. So my brain has forsaken me. But you guys know what I'm talking about. Monogamy culture, I guess you could say. Like I feel like all of these things, because especially because of Instagram, people are kind of like waking up and they're like, I have multiple options. I don't have to think this way. And I think that it was very controversial, like at a time. And I mean, I watched that, what is it called? The Red Table Talk with Jada Pinkett Smith, where she had some talking about this that I follow. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's so cool. But like, I think like these things, when they get on Oprah, when they get on shows like that, you know, they become more in the ether. And I think as time moves on, I think we're going to find, more fluidity in relationships, more prioritization of platonic intimacy. Not even just like let's say you are a monogamous person. I think people are recognizing that they need certain types of friendships, and maybe never were taught how to socialize properly. Another thing that's just kind of come up in my own life, in my own experience, that I'm seeing a lot in my work is just with late in life diagnosis of autism and ADHD, people feel like they're hitting these climaxes where they don't fit in with certain people. Some friends have let them down over the pandemic, things like that. And so people are learning that they're finding their tribes. They're finding more autistic people that get their own neurological needs, their needs for intimacy, their needs for, you know, emotional regulation, which is very different for autistic people or ADHD people, you know, things like that. Like, I think I could see major changes there too. Like people finding their tribe by their needs and their desires. Sorry.
I love this. No, this is great because I agree with you 1,000%, especially in sexuality. Mars, Pluto, having the strong connection to sexuality. And maybe what felt morally corrupt, quote unquote, in the past isn't going to be this way anymore, right? Like, let's be real. Because I think when I think about Leo and Aquarius as well on an axis, I think about rules, right? And like what rules are made that we break. in order to make new ones, tradition versus non-tradition.
Yeah.
And how do we rewrite tradition, right? That's part of society, quote unquote. So maybe it's this idea, and of course, Leo having a lot of vitality and there being a lot of sexuality in that. And I love that you brought up platonic intimacy, because one of the things I tell people all the time, and I'm married, right? One of the things I tell people all the time is that it is unfair for me to ever expect my husband to be everything for me, right?
Yeah.
It's really unfair. So there's this level of like, there's going to be people in your life who hold emotional intimacy, mental intimacy, physical intimacy, right? Sexual intimacy, spiritual intimacy for you that not one person can ever fulfill. And if we think about Leo, individuation, and Aquarius, collective needs, right? What are our Mars opposite Pluto? For those people, it's like, think about what are your individual needs, and can they be satisfied by potentially multiple people? Does that take away a power struggle that you might be experiencing, where there's an expectation, going back to what I said about Leo and expectation, on putting that all on one person or one entity or one idea? Break the rule, break it. Doesn't have to exist.
It's interesting. I've had a lot of clients recently that, you know, they've come to me and they're like, I love this person and I feel confused by it. Like, I know that I'm queer. I don't feel sexual feelings for them, but I get like jealous, or, you know, like, or I have like issues with like, I need to know where they are. Like, it drives me crazy. Like, I can't figure this out. And I said to my client the other day, I was like, why does that matter? Why do all romantic relationships have to be sexual? Why do we have these like limitations, these labels, these expectations on things? I was like, isn't that the point of polyamory at its core, is that different people are there to fulfill different needs that you might have. So you don't feel sexual about this person, but you genuinely love them. There's nothing confusing or weird about that. That just means that someone you care about. Like, you don't have to have sex with everybody, you know?
Right. No, and you're absolutely right. And I think that's that beautiful Aquarius kind of Pluto energy starting to like bubble up a little bit more, right? It's like, where can we find connection in such a powerful, regenerative, restorative, all Pluto words, way that brings us closer together to maybe other groups of people. So even like what you were saying about late stage late age diagnoses for ADHD and autism. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. I'm like, my brain also similar. It's like almost 8 o'clock here and I'm like, what is anything?
Happy Gemini retrograde, guys.
I'm like, soup, Campbell's soup. I want a side note for a second. Someone said to me today, Mars retrograde feels like when you release the valve on an Instapot or something like that. And I was like, wait, this is brilliant. Like, this is so what that is. And then like, before you open the lid, it's like releasing the tension before you open the lid. Anyway, I digress. I was like, oh, that's such like a great explanation of it. Anyway, going back to what you were saying about like finding your niche or your group, like, isn't that just very Leo Aquarius anyway? Right? Like, where are my people? Where do I feel accepted? Where can I share the spotlight, right? Leo, but also who can I celebrate in the process? And I would say Mars and Leo opposite Pluto and Aquarius. I think there's going to be a lot of looking for reciprocal celebration, right? In your relations, in your personal life, like even with just you, right? Are you celebrating yourself enough in this? Because maybe that's part of your evolution. Maybe that's part of your transformation. I know a lot of Mars and Leo people who actually aren't very self-confident, right? I think there's a common misconception there.
Yeah.
And so maybe this is a call to turn that around and do a little bit of like a 6 of Wands moment in tarot, which is associated with Leo, right? Which is, I think, actually Jupiter in Leo, but still, right? You have that connection to say like, oh, can I feel victorious? And what would it take for me to feel that way in my own life? And there's that level of overcoming, I think, that's part of Mars opposite Pluto too. Really any Pluto transit.
Yeah, I think that Mars and Leo folks, they have definitely all the people. I have a few Mars and Leo type friends, and they're all very theatrical types of people, but not ashamed of it. But believe it or not, they're very shy people. But
Right.
they're like, it's a very weird conundrum that I noticed within them. Like, you tell them to recite like Superstar, Molly Shannon, remember Superstar? That's them. Like, they'll do it aimlessly, but then they'll like want to go hide in the next room. So maybe,
It's true.
yeah, I really like that. So I'm wondering if, like, I don't know, following your passion might be a bit of my advice. Like, if this transit is peeping up on you, this is like a good time. If there's like something you've always wanted to explore, you felt shy of, I'm not good enough, like, how can you do it? And how can you do it in a way that's like community based or friendly, or just like having like a starter's attitude? Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna like ask people, I'm going to talk to people, I'm going to collaborate with people, and I'm going to figure this out and tinker with it until I do. I also keep thinking about this idea of technology and how really there's going to be big technological changes in the next few years. VR, you know, AI, definitely the internet is changing. And I can't help but think, like, how can we start to build platforms that help with everyone's success? Because I feel like Pluto and Scorpio people, who are becoming of age now, right? And Pluto and Capricorn people, for the most part, I feel like are people that want to see everyone's success. They want small business to grow. They kind of like this is a much cooler generation overall, you know, they want to see everyone win. So we're going to try to find weird ways, weird loopholes almost, I feel like. Very like, it feels very cowboy-esque or very Western-esque of creating that. I admire the millennials' intent so much to like just kind of find our ways to like fuck over big business. So I'm like hoping that there's a little bit of that like hackers vibe to it.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Guys,
you know, it's funny. You, from a VR perspective, I mean, virtual reality and augmented reality is really just a stage. So here's your Leo polarity to Aquarius, right, of technology. So we're going to
yeah,
have all this world's a stage. How are you presenting? What's the aesthetic vibe of what that's going to be? There's one aspect of that. But then also, I loved what you were saying before about following your passion, because going back to like Leo, Mars and Leo people, what sets you apart is your superpower, right? What makes you eccentric or unique, or that Leo, whatever you're known for, that you feel you want to be known for, that is what sets you apart. So then where are the people that nurture that? Pluto and Aquarius. And then from a collective standpoint, you were talking about the Pluto generations and how they're coming forward. I do think Pluto and Scorpio people have started to break the barriers in intimacy, right, around sexuality, right? That's who's kind of coming forward. Pluto and Libra people even have started to like change what relationships look like. Let's give them a little bit of credit too, right? They may not be millennial, but we have to give them some love.
give my own generation that much credit.
Give yourself some love though, right?
Yeah.
Like, you all were really like, I can't put up with the relation. Like, Pluto and Libra is saying divorce is okay, right?
Yeah.
Literally, like, I can't put up with just being in this one relationship forever. Let's give them some credit. Pluto and Scorpio people then take that further and say, like, maybe intimacy goes further than just this. Pluto and Sag people come in and say, right, like, let's spread that message. Let's disseminate. Let's bring it out to the world. Pluto and Cap people, the people, what, 2008, I think was the first year of that. So
Yeah.
people born in 2008, how old are they now? They're young still, 14?
My niece is there, and it's just very interesting watching. I guess that would be Gen Z, watching a Gen Zer grow up. They're very
Yeah.
they're very smart. Like, she's like younger than me, but like she is like I don't, I can't, she's an encyclopedia. It just blows my mind.
Well, so, but Pluto and Capricorn people, like, part of
Yeah.
their mission, I think, would be to reform the structure, right,
Yeah.
of it all. So, but go cardinal to cardinal, give Libra a little bit of credit there, because they definitely did. They did some of the back work that helped propel a lot of millennials and then early Gen Zers, or I guess older Gen Zers, forward into the work that they're doing. Like even reforming the idea of equality, right? Like what does it mean to a Pluto and Libra to really have justice, to really have equity in something, right? Give Pluto, right? Like you all know that better than most. And so then it informed Pluto and Scorpio and Pluto and Sag to fight for that, right?
Yes.
And I'm going to knock Pluto and Scorpio for a second because we weren't as vocal as we could have been in those learnings that you all had. It's really Pluto and Sag kids who are out there like really leading that. And then Pluto and Scorpio people coming in and saying, well, we'll help with the power, right? We'll align with you because we see the vision, right?
Yeah.
But
I always think about like Pluto and Libra people also are very interesting to me because in addition to like changing relationships and things like that, I think about the general ways in which music and dance and the arts were conveyed. I feel like they changed that entirely. And I think when you change that, you change the culture, because I think that we find things, we learn things through our music, through our art, through our television, through the things that we experience as well. So I think that was like a generous thing. And I think Pluto and Scorpio kind of just like took like that magnifying glass and was like, what did they make? We're going to kind of just dive a little bit deeper there. We're going to dirty it up a little bit.
Well, I also feel like Pluto and Libra people started to say, I know it's getting a little off topic, but I also feel like they gave the opportunity through helping with like arts and culture that saying queer culture can be acceptable, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And with Pluto and Scorpio, that maybe, right, magnifying glass took that a little further and said, well, no, we're here, right? Like it's not even that we're acceptable or tolerable. We don't want to be palatable. We want to be digestible, right? There's a difference. Palatable means I don't need to be your taste, but digestible means that I'm here to be here for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And the nourishment that goes along with that.
Pluto going into Aquarius, what do you think their responsibility, I guess is the key word to be? Like, what do you think could drive that on a generational level? Like, so we're not talking about an level. Like if you are watching this and you are Pluto and Leo and you're part of this generational change, what are some things that you might suggest, like thinking about as far as your culture, your space, the people that you individualize with?
So I would say part of the goals or maybe the mission or maybe whatever it is that Pluto and Aquarius is here to do, revolutionize the idea of community. How big is your community? What can that really look like? But what about also hopes, dreams, right? Like, what does it mean to be visionary, to be idealistic? Is it okay? Can we actually act and implement the ideals that were set forth before us that we agree with? Or can we implement new ones, break rules to make new ones, right? I always view Aquarius as like, it is a change maker, but it's because it doesn't live in the confines of societal rules. It's a good citizen. It can be a good citizen, but sometimes being a good citizen doesn't mean acting within societal structure.
I love that. I always keep thinking about like how the next few years, like the astrology in AOC's chart. And I'm like, she just has an easy way to make a pathway. She's got sextiles and trines from here on in. So I feel like that's the vision.
Well, so like literally, let's take socialism, like that idea of it, maybe not the extreme of it, but that is very Aquarius, right? Pluto Aquarius. So, and if Pluto is taking the underbelly of something, maybe there's also, play a little devil's advocate, are there things that we need to fix around like a more socialistic society in order to make it work and not actually fall even, in history, some socialist society did not work, right? And in strong capacities that it's existed in some ways, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means what can we learn from that and make it better?
I love that. I always think, because it's hard for me not to think about things from a disability standpoint too. Just that's what I'm here to do. And that's the family I was born into. I keep thinking about, like, again, the internet, how much the internet changed late in life diagnosis. And I keep thinking, you know, Leo, what's Leo? Leo is children. And I'm thinking Aquarius, the internet, so you have this whole like layer that we just talked about, which is like the reparenting era, but like kids who are actually now having their first children, and like they're actually being aware of what milestones look like and how that might look different for different genders. And why there are late in life diagnosis, unfortunately, is because those milestones have not been reported correctly. Autism doesn't look the same. It's a huge spectrum. I definitely was able to do X, Y, and Z milestone growing up, but people just thought I had behavioral problems. You know what I mean? So like, I'm really excited about the potential for acknowledgement to the disability community, like getting met younger. So like, I feel like that's one system we could easily rebuild since we're paying attention to it. So that's like one thing that like excites me, I think, about this transit. So if you're interested in like any sort of like disability work or getting involved with that, this would be like a good time for something like that. Or if you're having children, to learn about it.
I love that you bring this up, because I think about accessibility in all capacity. So my husband works, part of the projects that he does is like literally website accessibility. And that's becoming such a big deal to people. And so he helps with auditing and making sure, and like his mother, so my mother-in-law is legally blind. And so it's like, he always thinks about, what would it be for my mom to try to even see this? Because she can see-ish, right?
Yeah.
But like, she wears, full disclosure, she wears 3D printed contacts that she has to suction cup into her eyes, and then glasses on top of that to even like see something, right? And it's not clear. But the point being is like, what would it take? He thinks about his mom all the time when he designs websites for them from an accessibility standpoint. So there's digital accessibility, Pluto and Aquarius, right?
Yeah.
And that sort of, and even like Mars, what is your role in creation, right?
Yeah.
In that space. Full disclosure as well, his nodes are Leo Aquarius. So there's that kind of dichotomy showing up right there.
Yeah. Right? If you're watching this and you were born in like 1990, those are your nodes. So this is going to be relevant for you too.
Especially as Pluto goes over your...
I forget. Do you? No, it's 1989, 1990, I think, right?
It's somewhere in there. Yeah, it's like later 1989, 1990, and I think even possibly very, very early 91. I could be wrong. And then it's 99 and 2000.
Oh yeah, that would make sense too. And then I'm also thinking like one of my nieces has Chiron in Aquarius too. So I'm thinking like, again, another conversation like of Aquarius there too, that's going to be generational, because Chiron doesn't move very fast. So
nope.
Yeah.
Well, and then my 92 to 95 or 6 babies, Chiron and Leo, right?
Yeah.
Is it 96? Maybe it's earlier than that. Maybe it's 95. Can't remember.
Okay, so in wrapping up, we have a bunch of different great suggestions. I kind of want to ask you, is there like a book or two that you might recommend, or a television show or a movie that you think someone should watch if they're going through a Pluto transit to their Mars that like really shook you or like helped you?
You know what movie I watched right before? So I watched it in 2012, and it made me cry, and it spurred so much energy in me that from the 2013 to 2015 period is where I went through my exaction and all the transformation and everything. It was Cloud Atlas. It was, and I don't know what it was about that movie, but it really moved me. And I watch it every year now, like just at least once a year, as something that I reflect on. And even the soundtrack to that is very moving to me. But there's this, maybe this even goes along with Pluto and Aquarius a little bit too. There's a very futuristic vibe, and it takes you through lifetimes. Do you know the story? Have you ever read the book?
I read the book. I know who Ayn Rand is, but I've never seen the movie. I didn't know there was a movie. Continue.
Yes. Well, so the book is amazing. I've also read the book, but I read the book after I watched the movie because I didn't realize it existed. Anyway, I digress. It's kind of it's a story. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think she's an Aquarius.
I think you're right. But there's like, it's like this story through time, right? And like the resilience, the pain, the grief, which is all very Mars opposite Pluto. It's the transmutation of that pain and grief throughout time, breaking cycles, Mars opposite Pluto. It's
Yeah.
also the power dynamics that happen within that story. And I also think it's life and death, right? And one of my
Yeah.
favorite quotes is death is only a door. And Mars opposite Pluto is very much so taking that first step into death to be reborn again, I would
Ooh,
say.
love it. It's interesting that you mentioned that. I was watching something a couple of days ago. I was posting about it that had like a similar theme. I was watching a document unrelated at all. I was watching a documentary that it was a 3-part docu-series on Daniel Johns, who was the singer from Silverchair.
Mm-hmm.
And he was involved in a really like life or death car accident pretty much a few months ago, where he admitted that he was over medicating for his PTSD, and he went to rehab. And if you follow his career at all, he's always been kind of reclusive. He's the closest thing our generation would probably get to a Kurt Cobain type. Just very, very introverted, like artist that has a very complicated relationship with fame. And what I was reading for years, I was a huge fan that he was very shameful of his past. He became famous when he was 15 years old, and he felt like he wrote these very sophomoric like albums, and he wanted to become David Bowie. He wanted to do something really great, and he just thought, like, he was like, well, how would you feel if your high school band became famous, kind of thing. And so for a long time, you could see he carried this shame with him about the
Mm-hmm.
past. And in this documentary, it's this beautiful like story about the correlation between time travel in our minds and anxiety and depression. And he's talking about these themes of the future and the past colliding. And he's making friends with his past through his recovery, very
Mm-hmm.
plutonic. And he just re-recorded a new version of an old song that he wrote when he was 15 and had a little girl singing it, and he wanted to do it in a very creepy carnival kind of way, which I think is very plutonic.
Yes.
So it's just interesting how all of these themes seem to be hitting home. So I would recommend watch Cloud Atlas and maybe watch that docu-series, because they're both going to kind of blow your mind.
I agree. You know, the only other film that comes to mind is What Dreams May Come.
Oh, that's another good one. Again, these themes of like, maybe I'm also
Descending those depths further into hell.
yes. These were good suggestions. Good suggestions. Okay. So I feel really good. Hopefully if you're watching this at home, you're feeling much better and much more ease with this transit. Remember, you are the future. So if somebody's handing you something that feels like shit, like there's a reason that you're seeing the shit. You know what I mean? Like, gross metaphor, but you know, you're
Well,
not
and I always,
out a reason.
well, I was going to say, and I always say that astrology happens with you, not to you. So
Yeah.
you have agency at the end of the day. If something is not working for you in this transit, what can you do differently then?
Yeah. This is a great transit for breaking a pattern once and for all. I will say this. When I've through this transit, it started off on a really like, you're going to be going through this for a long time. So I would imagine when it's getting to that 2-degree mark, you're going to feel it. And I would imagine there's going to be like some sort of inciting incident, and maybe that'll linger for a while. Maybe you're weighing with it. Maybe halfway through you get done with it and you're learning the lessons. But recognizing that even when things kind of fall away from you, even if they're sad, this is a big lesson for me right now, especially with it hitting Mercury. When things are falling away from you, I used to see it as a failure, and I used to see it like there should have been something that I could have done better. And what I'm really learning is sometimes we just come into each other's lives in a moment, and it sucks when it just doesn't connect in the next moment and you want that old moment back. but that's part of growth, is recognizing that we might just hold people for just a moment. And so let's cherish that. Let's build some intimacy within that. Like, let's make that meaningful, as opposed to, every breakup doesn't have to be the end of the world, like we can honor our friendship. We don't have to be enemies.
You just made me think Mars and Leo and celebrating the present, right? Because Leo is very present versus Aquarius being very future. And then the other thought I had was literally death is only a door. I mean, my Mars Pluto opposition was spurred by a breakup, right? Which we are friends. And part of the breakup, it was because I had a lack of understanding around what they were going through personally, their own personal, like kind of Martian journey.
Yeah.
Turns out they ended up transitioning many years later. And at that time, like I was so young, I didn't understand. They didn't understand. They didn't know what they were feeling, where they were going. And we came back together as friends, maybe like, I don't know, 5 years after, 6 years later. And I met them as they are now. And it was such a beautiful experience because there's also Mars opposite Pluto in a nutshell, watching that transformation, right? Of someone else becoming who they are, but having to, in some ways, at times go through hell to get there, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it felt like this beautiful, like, moment to kind of be like, that point in my life was very hard. That point in your life was very hard, but I can see you clearly now. Disillusionment, right? Getting that to go away. And vice versa. You see me clearly now too. So thank you for sharing that, because that's beautiful.
Well, thank you for coming. I hope that we can talk again soon. Like I've been wanting to do a one-to-one with you for a while, so I'm glad we caught each other. I just knew we would probably riff really well.
Agreed. You have, I have to commend you. You are brilliant. You're really well spoken. And you have such beautiful ideas. And I love hearing you talk about them and share them, and that you have people who are listening to you because they should. Like you know what you're talking about.
Well, thank you. I have imposter syndrome at the moment. So this helps me. I'm going to skip now. I think I'm going to skip. I hit a milestone, guys. I didn't know how to skip till I was 7. I'm going to skip now. I'm going to honor my inner child. Thank you so much, Anthony. I hope you have a great night.
You're so welcome. You too.
Bye.
Bye.